Hello, I'm Anthony. Welcome back to the Halion 7 tutorial series. This is part 2 of a little mini section where we're having a look at wavetable synthesis. It's such a huge subject, there was no possibility I could cover it all in one episode. We're going to have a look at some more of the features in it today. Hope you're enjoying this series so far. If you are, please check out the Patreon and channel member links below. Great way to help support my channel. First thing that we're going to do today is have a look at some of the other preset options. The plus symbol gives you the simplest possible wave shapes to play with, but we also have presets. This little drop down symbol, select wavetable. If I open that, you get two options, anima and flux. Anima are fundamentally loop-based presets. We'll have a look at one of those in a little while. But we're actually going to start today with the flux folder. I'm going to open this, drill into the saw-based presets. Saw are usually very good basic wave shapes because they have many harmonics. I'll be able to demonstrate that today. I'm going to choose the Saw Dual preset. All I have to do is single click it. I can close the preset browser down. Its job is done. And now, as you can see, it's loaded up an entire wavetable. Let's have a listen to the sound before we do anything. It's got kind of a filter sweep effect in the sound. Just to reinforce the point, if I solo any individual one of these waves and press play, you're going to get exactly that sound. This will sound much more similar to a simple sawtooth. And here you can see in the oscilloscope, that's slightly edited, but fundamentally it's a simple sawtooth. Over the course of the 225 waves, that sound evolves. That's what's happening. The wavetable is transitioning between all of those waves. If we zoom in, we can see all of those crossfades. But obviously there's so much to play with. You know, there's an awful lot of work going on here. Let's zoom back out again. Take it out of solo mode, so we're playing the wave again. And I'm going to jump over to the zone tab. There's a few functions here that we didn't look at last time. On the bottom row, we're in the wavetable oscillator section here, obviously. In the bottom row, we have some options where we can control how we manipulate that wavetable. If I turn speed all the way down to 0, it's basically going to stick on the first wave of the table. So what you hear there is exactly the same as wave number 1. Well, of course it is because speed's still 0, but it's playing the wave that I've got selected. Now that's not very useful on its own because we've basically just subverted the wavetable. It isn't a wavetable anymore, it's playing a single wave. But we can take over manual control of our journey through that wavetable via the position control. Position control is here. It's currently at 0, which means by default every time I press a key, you're going to hear the first wave in the table, this one. But if I move the position, we're manually traveling through that wavetable now. We're no longer progressing through it at this fixed speed that we'd previously defined. And yes, by the way, this speed control is the same as the speed control over in the wavetable. Here it is, 15.6, turn it up a bit, back over to the zone. Speed control's changed, it's the same control. Let's turn it back down to 0. Now I don't want to have to move this position control manually every time I press a key. That's going to get pretty tedious pretty quickly. But of course we can assign it to a modulation source. So because that's the last control I had selected, it's defaulted. Wavetable 1 position has defaulted to our kind of quick view entry into the modulation matrix. I can click add modulation and I'll choose my modulation wheel. Now the modulation depth that I specify is going to determine the maximum extent that I can travel through this table. So if I set modulation depth to 100, as you can see, I've initialized my mod wheel. Here it is down at the bottom of the interface. Mod wheel all the way down. I'll travel up through the table. And there's the last entry in the table and back again. So I've now taken manual control of the wavetable position. I've still got all the same functionality, but it's on my mod wheel. Let's go one step further. Let's have a slowly oscillating LFO on top of the modulation wheel. Let's mix two different modulation types together. So I'm going to add a new modulation source, this time LFO 1. I want quite a low depth on this. I want the effect to be fairly subtle. So I'll set 10. Now don't forget modulation depth's sum. So if I want the LFO to go plus and minus 10, but I also have the modulation wheel. Don't want to get to that stage where I turn the modulation wheel all the way up and we basically get half a modulation because it can't get past the maximum. I'm going to pull my modulation wheel depth down to 90. And I also want to slow the LFO one down. At the moment it's oscillating once a second. Let's just hear it before I do anything. Okay, I just want to slow that down a little bit. Nice easy way to do it. We can jump to source, and here are all of my LFO settings. Here's the frequency, and I'm going to set that to 0.15, which is about 6.5 seconds to complete a single cycle. Now that we've done that, we can jump back to the wavetable oscillator, and let's hear the sum effect of those two controls. Mod wheel all the way down, turning the mod wheel up, let my hand off the modulation wheel, and now we have that gentle oscillation from the LFO on top. Even if I turn the modulation wheel all the way up to maximum, it requires the LFO to get me all the way to the top. And then very briefly, those two modulations sum together to get me to the 100 all the way up at the end of the modulation, the wavetable. Okay, good stuff. Let's get rid of all that modulation, throw all that stuff away. Another way that we can manipulate wavetable playback is with the use of the random position. I set that to 25. Now every time I press a key, I'm just varying. I've only used a quarter of the wavetable. Every time I hit a chord, you can hear I'm choosing a different place in the wavetable to play, but speed is still at 0, so the sound is static. Let's get rid of our random. The next thing that we can do is travel backwards through the table. So if I set my direction to -100 and my position to the end of the wavetable, now by default I've still got my speed set to 0, don't forget, so there's no wavetable movement at the moment. Every time I press a note, we're going to get the last wave in the table, which as you can see is a saw. If I bring the speed back in, now we'll start off at the end of the table and work backwards. The next function I want to have a look at is acceleration, but I'm going to choose a different sound to play with. I'm going to initialize my wavetable to throw all of those changes away. So if you're following along, hopefully that's going to help clear things down a little bit. Jump over to the wavetable, and this time let's choose an anima preset. Let's go into the Alt folder, and I'm going to choose Cyborg. Close that down. Let's have a look at the wavetable. So this time we've got 256 entries. Let's zoom, and what does that sound like? Back over to the Zone tab. Let's have a look at acceleration. So at the moment, everything that we've done, all of the demonstrations so far, have been either static speed, wavetable doesn't move at all, or constant speed. But we can actually change the rate of acceleration from one fixed value to a second fixed value. So we have an initial speed, but we have a target speed as well. So speed called speed is our initial speed, our basic or default setting. But this target speed is an optional second speed, and we'll get from one to another via the acceleration control. So let's choose my initial speed as 20. So we'll start off scanning through the wavetable slowly. All of these numbers are arbitrary, so basically just to play with them and see what they can do. But for this demonstration, I'm going to choose 20 again for the acceleration, up to a target speed of maximum, which is 800. So let's have a look at that from the perspective of the wavetable. So we start off slowly and we get faster. To make the effect even more dramatic, start off at speed 1. Particularly nice for sound effects and pads. Really nice to start off very slowly and then accelerate. Obviously salt to taste with those values. All of those sounds have got a very kind of sharp nasal sound to them. Let's just smooth them off a little bit with a filter. Jump over to our filter section. I'm going to right click on the wavetable, select all of the waves, and this time I'm going to choose a filter preset. Up to this box, select filter preset. I quite like these smooth defaults. Let's choose smooth, resonant low pass. You can see the line that it's going to apply because I selected every wave in the table. They're all going to have the same filter applied. Just taking away some of that sharpness. Okay, strap yourselves in. We're heading into choppy water. I'm going to initialize the wavetable again, get us back to a default setting, and I'm going to change my sine wave for a saw. So at this point, I've basically thrown away the concept of a wavetable. I'm just playing with a saw because there's a strange feature inside the wavetable synthesizer in Halion whereby it's a complete additive engine inside the wavetable editor. I'm not altogether sure why they've put it here. It's absolutely extraordinary. If you click the Spectrum tab, what you see here is an additive synthesis view of a sawtooth wave. Remember earlier when I said sawtooths are really good because they have all of the harmonics? That's what you're seeing here. I'm going to make this window as big as I can. This tallest bar at the left-hand side, if I hover over it, it says number 1 minus 5.4 dB. That's the fundamental harmonic. The pitch that that harmonic is going to be played at is going to be determined by the key that you press. So when I press middle C, we get a tone playing at 130 Hertz. That's the fundamental. Every single one of these bars represents a sine wave. Watch the spectrum analyzer in the bottom right-hand window. See this peak here, the second peak? It's the second harmonic. Watch carefully. There is an exact 100% equivalence between what you're seeing. That's the output of a spectrum analyzer. All of the sine waves, known as harmonics, of a complex wave represented in this linear fashion, and all of these vertical bars represent all of those individual sine waves. So I've basically just kind of broken the sawtooth wave by changing one single harmonic. It's not a sawtooth anymore. I can try to rebuild it. I'll fix that temporarily and then I'll show you a way, because I'm pressing the key and using my mouse at the same time. Kind of fixed the sawtooth there. It's nearly rebuilt. It's very, very difficult to actually completely reconstruct it from inside this editor because the mathematical relationship between all of these waves is very complex and has to be absolutely perfect in order for you to get a perfect sawtooth wave. Now then, when I strayed over into that odd harmonic, it's because I was freeform drawing with my mouse. If I click these harmonics and start drawing with my mouse, you can see I'm absolutely wreaking havoc on the wave. You do have an undo function, of course, in Halion, so I can undo that. In fact, I can undo several commands to get me back to the point, eventually, where I've got my perfect sawtooth again. If I hold the Shift key down, however, which I'm going to do now I'm constrained to whichever harmonic I click in. I'm moving left and right with my mouse, but I'm only actually editing one single harmonic. If I hold the Control key down, I can delete individual harmonics. And finally, if I hold the Alt key down, I can draw lines. So this is a very rich, fully featured additive synthesizer inside your wavetable. What I'm editing here is a single entry in our wavetable. It's absolutely extraordinary that they've built an additive synthesizer inside the wavetable. So every single one of these waves can be manipulated down to the single harmonic. In addition to being able to edit each of the individual harmonics, there's a very rich multi-selection tool as well. Up at the left-hand corner, we can come out of the Draw tool, which is what we're currently in, and head into the Selection tool instead. And now when I drag with my mouse, I'm not editing notes at all. I'm selecting groups of notes. Having done so, you can pick up all of these various anchors, and edit the harmonics in all sorts of funky ways. So at the moment, I'm just clicking with my mouse. And as you can see, I've got all sorts of scaling options. If I hold the Control key down on my keyboard, however, I switch into exponential mode. And now instead of scaling linear, I scale exponential. And now all of my operations are exponential instead of linear. And finally, as if that's not enough, if you press the Alt key down on your keyboard whilst in selection mode, you enter a temporary draw mode where you can edit individual harmonics inside your selection zone. Editing individual harmonics is extreme sound design, but it's all here. It's all inside the Wavetable synthesizer. But we're not done yet. In order to demonstrate another feature of the additive synthesizer, I need to load in a sample. Up until now, we've been playing with preset waves. I'm going to load in a sample called 04 Clap Hit. Hopefully, this should be available to you. It's part of the standard Steinberg suite. So I'm going to drag that into the sample editor. And now a new thing's appeared. You can see all of these orange bars. That's the phase of each individual wave. If I zoom out, you'll see just how many harmonics there are in this sample. Every single one of those sine waves, they're still all simple harmonics. This zoom feature, by the way, is very much your friend. If you're editing 8 and 16, pretty much the way to go to have like a usable range to edit with. Every single one of these harmonics is played back at a particular point of phase. So when you press a key, they don't all start playing at 0 point on this imaginary graph. They're all shifted slightly. And these orange bars represent how far forwards or backwards in time each one of these individual harmonics is played relative to all of the other harmonics. Are you keeping up? I'm not. Let's have a listen to this clap hit and we'll play with it a little bit. I'm going to create 100 waves so that we can have a basic approximation of what we're hearing. This is a good point to mention actually. Wavetables really don't like playing percussion sounds, so the sample itself is a percussion sound. When you turn that into 100 individual waves, it sounds something completely different. Totally understandable, because fundamentally all of this is basically just like a pitched interpretation of the wave that it's seeing. But anyway, we've created these individual entries in the wavetable. Here's our 100 entries. So if I zoom in a little bit to the beginning of the wave, I'll pick one of these waves a little way in, maybe 6 or 7 in the table. Let's choose this one. Let's solo. Very, very quiet fundamental. Can you hear how nasal and kind of ruined that sound is? When you have a look in the spectrum, it's completely obvious why. Because there's no fundamental to this sound. It's all overtones and harmonics. And you can see this, the first harmonic it's chosen is all the way at harmonic number 7. So if I'm playing a C on the keyboard, 130 hertz times 7 is 910 hertz. So if we have a look in our spectrum analyzer, here's our first harmonic. And if I hover over it accurately enough, it's 910 hertz. Every single one of those harmonics has a particular phase. So this is where, relative to all of its siblings, all of its other harmonics, that wave's being played. Let's arbitrarily add a new harmonic. Let's give it a fundamental. And we'll make it play at maximum volume. We've just dramatically impacted the sound. And now you get that really strong kind of essence of sine wave, because we've just introduced this massive fundamental with all of the other tingly stuff. I'm going to set its phase to 180 degrees. So I picked up this orange bar, turned it, well, it's actually 178, but it's close enough. That's going to be good enough for the demonstration. We've had basically no impact on the sound at all, because this sound is its own thing, its own independent entity. There's nothing else in the outside world with which it can interact. So the phase of that wave is kind of irrelevant. It's only if it's interacting with another sound at the same frequency that you're going to have phase issues. Well, let's do that. Now, unfortunately, I just made a complete mess of the demonstration. This stuff is hard, sorry. I'm just going to reload my 04 clap hit back into an empty wavetable. I'll have another go at this. What I want to do is demonstrate how phase is real with respect to these basically additive synthesis engines. So I've loaded my simple sample in. It really doesn't matter what the sample is. I'm going to throw the vast majority of the information away. I just want a sample so that I can play with the phase. What I'm actually going to do is delete almost all of the harmonics from the entire wave. Press the control key down, throw away all of these waves off into infinity. I haven't been able to find an elegant way to get rid of them all in a single hit, but this is a reasonable way of doing it. Zoom into 16, and I'm just going to keep the fundamental. So now I basically have a sine wave. Control click to set the phase to 0 degrees. There's my sine wave. Gone an awful long way to make a really simple sound here, but that's a sine wave based off a sample. So I have phase. I can edit the phase here, and as you can see, as I move forwards and backwards, I'm actually editing the thing manually. Now bear in mind, the wavetable messes with phase with this function down at the bottom, align phases. So if I disengage that and say keep original phase, I now have the ability to manipulate this. If I make a copy of the zone, paste it back into the layer, and in my copy, set the phase to 180 degrees. I play that note and start moving the phase. It's going to get louder and louder. Absolutely fascinating stuff. Entire additive synthesis engine inside the Wavetable editor. Who would have guessed? Hope you enjoyed the episode. Please hit like if you did. I'll see you next time. Thanks very much.